they started working out what was required to get a man onto the moon. So they start with the Mercury capsule, which is one man in space, launching them. That was done successfully. John Glenn was a very famous astronaut who orbited the Earth. There were several others in the Mercury program. That was followed by the Gemini program, which was 2 men in space at the same time, and they had to practice the docking in space, so that if they're going to go to the moon, they're going to have to work out how to get to the moon. So they practiced these launches. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins are obviously going to be the Apollo 11 astronauts. They were on the Gemini program. So this was all going on. At the height of the Apollo program, 400,000 people were working flat out, designing, building and testing the equipment that everybody thought was going to be necessary to get to the moon. This is fine. There's no conspiracy about any of this. This is all on record. These are all people who were working, doing the best job they could. They were using slide rules initially to design the spacecraft because the computers weren't really up to it. And if you want to see what a slide rule looks like, if this sounds a bit historic, it is a bit historic. You've got to go to a museum to have a look for one.
Those are a little, yeah, I've seen them.
They're actually very good pieces of kit, and they do the job they do, but they're not computers. They came along a bit later. So having decided that they're going to go to the moon, they have to work out what the thing looks like. So they launch various unmanned satellites, the Ranger, the Surveyor, and the Orbiter program, to photograph the lunar surface to find out the best place to land. One of the principles of any scientific development is that you test your equipment. And if you're going to have men or humans on board, you have to test the equipment without humans on board first to make sure it works. Otherwise, you're going to put the lives of people on board in jeopardy. Apollo 6 was an unmanned launch of the full Saturn V rocket. It's 3 stages. Most of it is fuel. It weighs about 3,000 tons. And in order to get the amount of fuel through into the engines, it requires very powerful fuel pumps. What was discovered on Apollo 6, which is an unmanned launch, was that the rocket very nearly shook itself apart. It's called the pogo effect, which is acoustic vibration. The flow of the fuel was probably being interrupted at certain points due to the design of the compressors and the fuel pumps. And it was basically, pogo effect describes it quite well. It was bouncing up and down. And the reports after the Apollo 6 launch was that if it had had humans on board, they would have been unable to do any operation on the craft. Anyway, Apollo 7 followed. This was a manned launch into Earth orbit, which was not the full Saturn V rocket. And it was just to demonstrate the ability to get the whole piece of equipment, which is the lunar lander, the command and service module, into orbit, which is fair enough. And America can do what it feels appropriate. But the point about Apollo 8 is that the rocket had not been successfully tested without humans on board. The heat shield of the returning command module had not been tested at lunar orbit return velocity, which is basically the same speed you leave Earth at, 25,000 miles an hour. And yet they managed to orbit the moon and return safely and land. This is extremely dangerous to do something that had been previously untested, and the heat shield on the Apollo craft had not been tested under operational conditions at this point.
And so just to stop you for a quick second, that's something that a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, have never heard of. NASA, they're perfect, okay? Let's face it. They make no mistakes, quote unquote, but they test everything. So this is an untested mission, basically. This is, okay, we're running low on time here, guys, get in.
Yeah, it was an untested mission, but it demonstrated, apparently, that the Saturn V rocket could do what it had been designed to do, i.e. fly to the moon, take 46 tons into lunar orbit, and return safely to the Earth. But there had been no testing done prior to its mission, which is extremely dangerous. Now, here's a question. What's the temperature on the lunar surface
Cold.
when the sun is shining?
Well, probably hot.
It's hot.
There's no protection.
It's hotter than the boiling point of water, i.e. 100 degrees centigrade, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So they've got to keep cool because they're in bright sunlight. There are no clouds on the moon. There's no atmosphere on the moon. The sun is shining. And if you've ever tried getting into your car after it's been sat in the sun for a few hours, it's going to get a bit warm inside. So they must have had air conditioning. No, they didn't have air conditioning, because you can't have air conditioning in a vacuum. A vacuum is the best insulator that we have. That's why you have thermos flasks. So if you've got a vacuum, how do you get rid of the heat that is generated inside the spacecraft, which has an atmosphere? Because they weren't wearing their spacesuits, except when they were on the lunar surface. And the answer is the heat was radiated away. Now, if you do the calculation, it's called black body radiation.
Okay.
You do the calculation, you can work out what the internal temperature of that spacecraft will be sat on the lunar surface. And the answer is 246 degrees Fahrenheit or 120 degrees centigrade, i.e., it would cook you. So what on earth were they doing? How did they survive? How did they manage to then return safely to the Earth?
And now we get to one of the first discrepancies. Getting there. Getting there was possible, yet untested. And now that they're there, okay, let's face it. The moon, number one, it's cold at night. When the sun is out, there's no protection. There's no magnetic field. There's nothing to hold these solar rays and particles from hitting anything. Now, that's why there's so many massive craters on there. With this being said, you would fry just going there. I mean, according to math, science, it's pretty obvious. But my question would be, they're on there. Why would they risk their lives? I know it's a risk going into space, but wouldn't NASA, especially NASA, have figured all of this out prior to even sending them, knowing that they could not survive the trip, let alone the landing on the moon?
Yes, that you would have thought. But in fact, I haven't even mentioned the biggest problem that they had to overcome to get to the moon.
Okay.
Which is the radiation in space, and specifically in the Van Allen radiation belts, which surround Earth. They're held in place by the Earth's magnetic field, and they protect the Earth from the radiation of space, the solar flares that we get, the solar particle events, which is powerful enough to knock out electric grid lines.
Oh, yeah, you bet it is.
When they're really powerful. And also the galactic cosmic rays, which emanate from deep space and penetrate virtually everything, including humans. Now, humans are not particularly well designed to survive radiation. That's why if you go out in the sun for too long, you're going to get sunburnt. And if you stay out for too much longer, you're going to get sunburnt and die because you'll get skin cancer. That's what radiation does. It causes humans to suffer. It actually affects the DNA in our cells. Obviously, too much sunburn isn't a problem because you know if it's going to happen. The point is, you can't tell if you're getting X-rays or gamma rays. And in space, these are particularly powerful because there's no protection. So one would assume that there had been protection built into the Apollo command modules on which the astronauts were traveling. And on the lunar surface, you would expect them to have radiation protection in their spacesuits. They didn't. There was no radiation protection in their spacesuits or in the craft in which they were traveling. So how did they survive? Because NASA now will tell us that radiation is a major problem for human travel beyond low Earth orbit.
And according to what you're saying, it's not just the suits that couldn't protect them. The actual capsule itself couldn't protect them either. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. The capsule, because it was made of aluminium, weight is a major problem in going into space. You've got to keep things as light as possible. So the capsule was made, the Apollo command module capsule was made of aluminium. Aluminium is not known for its radiation protection properties. It's light, certainly. And if you get protons, which are particles traveling from the sun, other radiation, if they hit aluminium, they actually create more radiation inside the craft than they do outside. It's one of the properties that particular proton events have. So you've got all these questions which haven't yet been addressed. And NASA, when asked, how did you protect your astronauts from the dangers of radiation in space, will not answer the question. They will not address it. Or they will say something like, well, we launched them in such a direction that they missed most of the Van Allen belts.
So go ahead, continue. This is amazing.
If you think about how serious the situation would be in a totally foreign environment, not only your heart rate would be jumping through the roof, but you'd have a very serious venue about you when you're moving about. Every little movement that you're making, you wouldn't want to step on anything that was sharp and cut through your boot. You wouldn't want to kneel down onto something. You'd probably have a probe with you to make sure that the ground is solid in front of you so you didn't fall down. I mean, these guys are just running around, falling down, all kinds of stuff, and making jokes about it. It just doesn't seem real. It seems like they've done it a dozen times before in a simulation, and they're on the same set. You know, it's too well rehearsed, as far as I'm concerned, to have any reality to it. The one point I'd like to make, though, is a few people have mentioned to me that it really doesn't matter. It's not important whether they actually made it there or not. You know, they don't think it's a real important feature that we get to the bottom of this.
It doesn't matter?
That's right.
They're saying it doesn't matter.
I said to one person, I said, well, I guess you've never had any money, eh? And he kind of looked at me and I said, well, just go on the stock market and invest your money, because NASA's out there on the stock market. And if the technology you're investing in isn't real, I mean, you can still make some money on that, but you better know the difference.
There's a lot of different conspiracy theories out there. They're flourishing, a lot of different conspiracy theorists. But like Marcus mentioned earlier, Scott, this isn't a conspiracy. It's blatantly obvious. So, I mean, this is where it's hard to swallow for a lot of people.
To me, it's very obvious. I mean, I can't look at any photograph now. It takes me only a few seconds. You can pull anyone up. I can show you what the astronaut is photographing and why he's photographing.
That's exactly what I want to touch on this segment. And I've been chomping at the bits here and holding it until this segment, so we have some time to discuss some of these discrepancies with both of you, you know, get some opinions from both of you, of course. But Scott, you've posted some amazing photos in the chat room, wgogdb.com. Just log in there, folks. You'll see them. And these photos have different, you have a flag that is full of moisture, mold, on a surface that obviously it's a vacuum. It can't survive. So explain some of these photos and how they are not on the moon's surface, to be blunt, how they're not even there to begin with.
Well, if you're a good American citizen, you're going to want to see an American flag photographed, right? You know, when they land on the moon, they're going to have to do it. And if it happened to be raining that morning, they're still going to photograph it anyway. But these astronauts, like I said, they're very disgruntled. They very, very, very carefully held that flag up and photographed it with the right angle so that you can see that it's wet, that it's not just a shadow. The one thing that's striking about it is you have physics professors saying that the flag couldn't wave because it was made out of aluminum or tin or whatever like that. Take a look at that flag. It's an official American flag, and an American flag is like no other flag in the world. I mean, stars are embroidered on and the stripes are stitched together. It's not just a silk screen. And when you take a close look at that, you'll see that it's a real American flag and that it's soaking wet. The two different colors in the blue show up quite nicely, as well as there's a few actual water spots on it. That particular photograph will stop anybody that has an argument against me at this point, and it usually gets them quite annoyed.
It can be a very annoying topic here. You know, it really could. Because, like a comment was just made in chat, a very important comment, and I'm sure you guys get a lot of it. And, you know, what they're stating in there is for every point made, a counterpoint can be made. They go back and forth, back and forth. That's why it's the great debate. It's been talked about for so long. You know, you have NASA, you have our country, our president. You know, we don't see these people as lying to us, telling us, hey, we went to the moon. Oh, no, we didn't really, but just go ahead and believe that for all these years. We went there, all your money, we spent all of your money on all of this high-tech equipment just to film this in a barren desert somewhere. It seems way out there. We did go there, We just didn't go there at that time. Was that possible?
If that was the case, we would be traveling there on a regular basis by now, 50 years later.
Okay, so with all of our technology, all this modern technology we have, we're able to talk to the entire world at once now, instantly, and have all of this computer technology, all of this material that has been invented, yet nothing is strong enough yet to have a man survive in space long enough to get to the moon, correct?
If we can get through that plasma field, maybe we might have a chance after that. That's pretty severe, that glass wall out there they discovered in 2012. They call it a glass wall. NASA calls it the impenetrable barrier.
Okay.
You can Google that right from NASA. They call it that.
According to Marcus, we'd be dead. The radiation would wipe us out. It would go through the capsule, go through everything, and then, of course, you've got photographic evidence that's in the chat room. People are looking at it. They're going through it. They're really enjoying it here. These are things that are eye-openers. And just like we talked about earlier, everybody may be in denial about this whole thing, especially Americans, and you guys are a neutral party. And I want to go ahead and put that out there for the new listeners. One is in the UK, one is in Canada. They're neutral, okay? So this is something that definitely needs some attention put to it because it has been talked about extensively. You have a lot of different reports on it. Yeah, your conspiracy theorists are going to blow a lot of things out of the water. These two, by far, I've definitely interviewed them before on other programs, are two of the most down-to-earth people I've ever met on this topic. So some more of the photos, some more of the discrepancies in there, Scott, let's get into that. You know, you've got some rocks, for example, on there. How are these rocks different in the photo than what we have seen?
Well, they're completely manufactured for the set, and most of them are just basically a plaster mold that they've put together. I mean, the one, it's called the Genesis rock, actually, and you can see where the astronaut just gave it a kick and knocked the rock apart. I mean, I don't know anybody that can just boot a rock with those boots on.
A little rough, yeah.
And crack it open, and inside there's a champion spark plug. I mean, it's right there in front of you. You can even see the first part of the letters if you've got a 4K video display.
Oh, boy.
And it's like I put that one up for an example. Of course, they do have the Genesis rock on display, and they don't have the spark plug with it. It's one of the samples they so-called brought back. Another one was discovered some very red rock on the moon, which they photographed, and they never brought any samples of it back. Well, it's just crushed brick. You're in a landfill site, and if you look closely at it, you can see the bricks, like the broken pieces of brick, but you can still see the pattern of the brick as they were formed on them when you're looking on the thing. It's just quite as simple as removing those colored glasses when you're looking at the photographs and just looking at what is in the photo, right? Like the Apollo 12, with they're setting up the central station for the experimental equipment, the mold that's on the bottom of it is quite apparent. It's right there for everybody to see. They definitely photographed it for you to see, and there's absolutely no way that NASA would have prepared this equipment in a clean room. The other examples of liquids are the rover itself. The rover has a oil leak in the rear wheel, the rear axle is leaking, and of course it's coming out, and then the dirt is sticking all over the rim on there, and of course there's no liquids in space. And the other photo I put up of the rover is the Apollo 17 rover, where they took the map and they put a piece in where the fender was missing off the back to stop the dirt from coming up, and the fender actually fell off in Apollo 16, and they're fixing it in Apollo 17. I don't forget how many hundreds of miles apart those two places are on the so-called on the moon that they mapped. Mm-hmm. But they took a different rover for each mission.
That's a long way.
It's not. It's the same rover through all of them. And I have pictures of the Apollo 15 rover with the same oil leak.
But the moon rover, okay, there's a photograph here, and it's an interesting one. One of the wheels is literally in midair, and that can be explained in one of two ways. Maybe it was bouncing, but it doesn't look like whoever's getting on there is even seated. to do anything with it.
I think he's just nailing on it to lift it off there. That's not the important part of that photograph. The important part is the tongs that is set on the pile of dirt. And the tongs is very carefully set up there to make sure that the shadow creates an arrow. And at the end of the arrow is an astronaut's glove embedded right into the pile of dirt. And the entire left side of that pile of dirt has gloves sticking out of it everywhere. I think I put 3 shots of it up there, of the close-ups of the gloves sticking out all over that pile of dirt. They aren't the same ones that they're using on it. It probably could have been a prototype glove before.
First of all, I'd like to apologize to many Americans who are probably feeling quite uncomfortable and are feeling that this Marcus Allen and this Scott Henderson really have no idea what they're talking about. I'd like to apologize to you because it is hard to accept something which you have believed, you've seen live on television, you consider to be part of the national consciousness. What we've got here is one of those paradigm-shifting moments. If you could accept that maybe NASA have not been entirely honest with the American people, or the world even, if you can accept that and just use that as one particular viewpoint and say, look, NASA, your business is in space. If it's a problem getting into space, tell us about it. We'll help you overcome it. We want to travel in space. We want to go to the moon, to Mars, to Venus. We want to travel. That is what humans do. We explore. If you are denying the evidence that we have presented, then you have to come up with a better answer.
Scott, give a final thought here.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I would like to see my children and my grandchildren properly educated in what we can and cannot do in space or technology and whatever that we have to offer out there. The best way to give them the incentive is to say, these are the challenges we need to go after. These are the ones that we have to resolve, right? Because they're still trying to resolve them today, yet they've claimed they've already done it. You know, NASA says, well, we lost the technology. I don't see anywhere in history where we've lost the technology. When the Wright brothers learned to fly, they kept on flying.
Forward, 40 feet down, 2.5, picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.